That's my cue. Hi, movie monkeys. I am Ryan Ellis. This is Bev Ellis, my wife. And this is Have You Ever Seen, in a few minutes, the podcast entirely, the whole thing, for In the Mood for Love. Right, In the Mood for Love. That's what we're talking about today. But very briefly, because we have no corrections.
Dun, 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 dun.
I was going to have to say that we had
so
one.
Right.
I took something out. No corrections at all. But we do have some corrections about a video, or the video from last week, Inside Llewyn Davis. I misspoke in saying I had seen half of the 10 Best Picture nominees when the nominations were announced. It's actually 7 as of that video and still as of now.
Thank God we didn't let that stand.
I like to be accurate. I'm very pedantic. Well, actually. So it's still Avatar 2, which I might see, as I've said before, and you probably won't. We'll see the Fablemans, the two of us, and we'll also see All Quiet on the Western Front, exact. All Quiet on the Western Front, I'll say it properly. But we've seen all the other Best Picture nominees at this point. So I said it was half, it's actually 7, and we still stand at 7 a week after we did the last video because we saw Tar and Women Talking that week and no Best Picture since. But we've seen some of the acting nominees since. We're going to talk about that very soon. So there were no corrections to In the Mood for Love, but any other thoughts you had about the film?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention when we were recording the podcast that the nature of the narrative of that story is really unusual. It doesn't play out like a typical story that we're used to, and it was intended to replicate not a story as it's told, but an event in your life as it's being remembered by one of the people. And that was an innovation, maybe not an innovation, but certainly a perfection of that form. And there are 2 Best Picture nominees, one Best Picture nominee and 1 Best Actor nominee, Aftersun and Tar, the movies I'm thinking of, that really replicate that story structure. And maybe that's part of the legacy of In the Mood for Love.
We said there's a legacy. He was homaging other films, whether meant to or not. And then also, I think maybe movies since then, more than 20 years, homaged it back.
Yeah.
It's a strong movie. We didn't love it. You're going to hear about that pretty soon if you haven't already in the actual podcast. But we certainly respected the hell out of it. And I decided to wear I don't know if this is pizzazzy, but I was wearing a boring old green t-shirt a few minutes ago. And Bev's wearing red, which certainly applies because a lot of red in the Mood for Love.
Plus it's February, so I'm wearing red to keep warm.
Fair enough. This room, though, is usually...
I should say, I'm wearing my fluffy sweater to keep warm.
But this room, though, gets awfully warm awfully fast. I'm already getting a little sweaty.
So let's get to the point.
So the next thing is movie reviews. We've seen 2 since we last talked to you in this format. As mentioned already, it wasn't Best Picture nominees, but it was acting nominees, so 1 Best Actor and 1 Best Actress. Movies we probably wouldn't have paid for had it not been for that. I think both are worth seeing, Aftersun and To Leslie. So it's Paul Mescal for Best Actor for Aftersun and Andrea Riseborough for To Leslie, which is very controversial. We'll get to that in a second, but Aftersun first. Paul Mescal is 27 only. Bill Nye, by the way, we'll talk about this more in the Oscars preview show on March the 6th. He's something like 40 or 50 years older than he is, so what a gap that is between acting nominees in the same year. Mescal's only made 4 movies. The Lost Daughter, last year, I guess it was, or was that 2 years ago? Maggie Gyllenhaal's movie was his debut. The movie's mostly a two-hander between Mescal and Frankie Corio, who plays his daughter. I like the movie, although I wouldn't say he's quite worthy of an Oscar, and I never would have thought of that had he not already been nominated, and that's why we paid to see it. The movie had you in tears, though, so maybe they got this nomination right, according to you.
I think it's the movie that accomplishes it. They both have really wonderful performances. I love Paul Mescal's performance. Best Actor... I don't know. But it is such a beautiful film, like a true small film, a really independent film that takes advantage of its lightweight. You know what I mean? They do some really creative stuff that is incredibly effective. They take some chances and do something fresh that by the end of the movie absolutely ruined me. I cried through the entire credits. And I've been thinking about it a lot since. It was so beautiful.
I'm going to give you a spoiler, and you don't need to worry about being alerted because I'm going to make a joke about it, but the vacation ended, and they went home. And that made her cry.
We haven't been on a vacation since before
That's
the
why.
pandemic.
And when we would come back from vacations, she would also cry. Even before the pandemic. When we had money. She wept.
So cold
it was
in
a
Canada.
common thing. She wept every time. Charlotte Wells directed that film and did a very nice job of it, I think. Michael Morris, who's new to making movies, did direct To Leslie. So the controversy about Andrea Riseborough, and this is unfortunate because she's a very good actress. She's been very good for a long time, but got the surprise nomination people are saying that her nomination bumped out either Danielle Deadwyler, who I said last week, and I'll say it again now, should have absolutely been nominated in this category and maybe should have won Best Actress this year. And the other one is Viola Davis. We haven't seen The Woman King, but we did see Till, so we can't comment on Viola Davis. But she's been here lots of times for the show, and she's won before, so I don't feel too bad for her. But Danielle Deadwyler, maybe she'll be in 10 great movies and get nominated 3 times in the next 4 or 5 years. Who knows? But as for To Leslie, we've seen this story before. She does a very good job of it. I don't have a problem with her nomination, but the legacy is always, well, probably always going to be the controversy about how, not even so much her, but her friends and other actors broke the rules about campaigning, which Harvey did so many times over probably, but not quite like this. So it's different, but also Harvey got away with things, as we know. Not just the raping and the abuse and all the stuff he did to women, but the whole thing about campaigning for Oscars. He did that sort of DreamWorks with Spielberg for many years. They did the same thing, basically, but did it, I guess, basically on the right side of the law, if you will. But in the case of this movie, it's Charlize Theron and Gwyneth Paltrow, Edward Norton, who were more called to task. And it's a shame because if To Leslie does last in people's minds, those who care about this kind of stuff will also remember forever, oh yeah, she shouldn't have got nominated though. That's not fair. They cheated. It's the basically steroids of movies.
Yeah. I struggle with this because the movie's just not that great. It's fine. It's not terrible. If you're curious about it, if the subject matter is in your wheelhouse, by all means, go see it. You'll probably enjoy it. Her performance is pretty committed. I'll put it that way. She's a great actress, and I don't know if she'll get another chance because she seems to always do smaller parts and elevate bigger projects with her in a small part.
She's Mandy in Mandy, by the way.
That's still a very supporting part. Have you ever seen her be a lead?
It's the titular role, Bev.
It's the titular role. Oh, what a great movie. We have to cover that one someday. But yeah, I just don't feel like she needed to be nominated for this film.
And you agree with me about Deadwyler too, right? That she should be there at the show.
That was a better performance and a better movie. But it's the Oscars. It's always going to be...
Someone's always overlooked. And this year,
yeah. You can't nominate everybody.
Happen to be black women, but there are a lot of non-white nominees in every category except Best Actor. That's 5 white guys. But the other 15 nominees, I think I said this already in a previous video, half are people that don't look like you and me.
You've seen Blonde, and I haven't. If you had to kick one actress out to get Deadwyler in, would it be Ana de Armas or...
It'd be de Armas because I respect what she did. That's right, that's another one we saw nomination-wise. Well, I saw, but you didn't. She's a good actress, but the whole time I'm thinking, you're not selling this. And maybe Michelle Williams did, who's against her this year, actually, in that category. She played Marilyn about 10 years ago and was nominated also.
Oscar, yeah.
Maybe no one can play Michelle Williams. Nobody can play Marilyn Monroe. And de Armas tried her best, but I won't ever see it again. It's almost 3 hours long. You said in one of our podcasts a long time ago that Marilyn Monroe might be the icon of all time in cinema. We barely ever covered her in a podcast, and now we do a little bit by someone else acting as her. She did her best, but I didn't like the movie very much at all. And I also, in some ways, I know this is condescending, but I wanted to do this to her a little bit, which is, you're trying very hard, but I'm not buying it. Mm-hmm. Sarah Silverman, I want to bring her up because I got thinking about I Smile Back with To Leslie. It's not the same thing, but Addict, Alcoholic, those kinds of movies. Silverman was nominated for a SAG. I forgot about that. I looked it up because I watched it. I took some notes for this exact video, and I got thinking, this must be somewhere, and it was on Canopy.
So you watched it recently?
I watched it last night.
Yeah.
So I watched it last night again, and the movie is also pretty rote, but it wasn't given this great push the way that To Leslie has been. And also Silverman was really out of her wheelhouse, and Riseborough I don't think really was. Silverman, seeing it again, I think the third time I've seen it now, is fantastic. So that's one of the things that bothers me too, is that she was recognized, but not by the Oscars. I think she probably should have been, and now you got Riseborough in there, also with controversy, and maybe shouldn't have been. And by the way, both movies, Aftersun, To Leslie, and Blonde, of course, that being on Netflix, are all available on streaming. We have 2 more orders of business today. Josh said a few days ago on YouTube that he has seen The Whale. We didn't love it, and neither did he.
You're right, Josh.
He saw Tar. He did love that, and so did we. In fact, he thinks it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there.
He wasn't as enthused about EEAAO or Glass Onion as we were. Although I wasn't that enthused about Glass Onion. I liked it quite a bit, and I'll probably watch it again one day. But EEAAO, we'll see that again at some point. That's on Prime. But the other thing he brought up was Skinamarink, the horror movie that maybe a lot of people have not heard about. You saw the trailer and you said it freaked you right out to the point you couldn't sleep very well. And then I watched it a day or two later.
Trailer.
And it made my skin crawl. I am definitely going to see that movie. He thought it was pretty good, maybe a little overrated. But I'm going to see it at some point, maybe without you.
I don't think I can watch it. This trailer haunted me. I don't think I can sit through it. I'll die.
The audio design seems awesome, so I'm going to see it at some point. It's in theaters right now.
Gives me very, like, Eraserhead vibes.
Oh, and breaking news right in the podcast. Guess what's on Prime, by the way, as of, I think, today, because we're recording this on Groundhog Day. Bodies, 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 which I think is horror, isn't it? It's a horror movie with comedy?
Yes, it's an A24 horror movie with teens. No, young adults.
Pete Davidson is one of the people in it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. And the last thing today is, since it's Black History Month, and we aren't planning to cover any movies by Black filmmakers, we thought it would be appropriate to, in these 4 videos we're going to do for this month, I guess we're going to keep on doing these Monday videos. We've been doing it all the year so far, to recommend a movie by Black filmmakers, whether it be the actors, the director, or all of them, if the whole thing is about Black people. And that's the point, too, is to be about the Black experience. So I'll go first, because I thought of this just last night, in fact. And I thought about covering this in one of my own solo shows, but this is the month of Crazy Stupid Love, and this movie doesn't really fit. Nothing I really found does fit. But I will recommend a movie that is on Canopy called Sounder. So Martin Ritt directed. He's not Black, but the stars are. Paul Winfield and Cicely Tyson were both nominated. I will probably watch it. I've seen it before, but it's been a long time, and I recommend it to all of you. Sounder, 1972.
And my recommendation is Attack the Block, a British film from 10 years ago, probably.
Maybe that.
In that neighborhood.
Joe Cornish, right?
Is that the director?
I think so.
Sure. It stars 2 people who've become much bigger stars now. One is Jodie Whittaker, who is currently Doctor Who, and one is John Boyega.
The Black person in this equation.
Well, there's a lot of other Black actors in the movie as well, and it's just a total action sci-fi movie about an alien invasion. Really low budget and fun and very working class London.
Cockney!
Yeah,
if I recall, it's Cockney.
Yeah, just put the subtitles on. But really fun movie that was a star maker for both of those two. It doesn't get talked about that much anymore, but that doesn't stop it from being great.
All right, so there are 2 movies to watch in Black History Month, starring Black people, and in my case, 2 Black people who are also recognized at the Oscars. So we'll do this again, the other 3 videos this month, I think, trying to find Black films. There are plenty others that we haven't already covered. We could recommend Do the Right Thing, but we covered that, and we covered Malcolm X, and we covered a lot of the great films by Black filmmakers. So thanks for watching our 6th YouTube video. We've done this every single Monday so far in the year. I guess this will be a regular thing. Now we get to In the Mood for Love. Check out the podcast if you haven't already through your regular podcast device. If you did already, it's the same thing, but say goodbye, Bev.
Bye, Bev.
Bye, Bev. In the mood for love. Carrying on an illicit affair with your neighbor is a dream we all share. Okay, I don't. I really, really don't.
Only I get that because I know our neighbor.
Inside joke. But if I was ever invited into my neighbor's house, the first thing, and the only thing, I would hope they would offer me is a steaming cup of coffee. And if they had some Sparkplug coffee specifically, then I would be a very happy man. Sparkplug continues to offer the freshest beans in Canada that are delivered within 1 week to customers in the U.S. and in our home and native land north of the border. Canadians can even enjoy free shipping. These are premium, fairly traded Arabica beans, the kind you'd be proud to offer to your wannabe lover. They've got a wide assortment of blends and roasts, including a rotating seasonal blend for those who might like something that fits the romantic vibe now that it's February. You can even get decaf and half-calf. But whatever level of caffeination suits you, we think you'd be wise to become a member of Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. You'll save money on every order that way, so there's a nice perk. You can also snag stuff that casual buyers just can't. You're an insider when you're a member. You can customize your membership too and cancel or at least pause on it anytime. And so can your hesitant, sexy neighbor if they become a member. Hit the keys to go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. That's HYES. And you can save 20% on your next order. Meanwhile, Andrew Luther, please don't softly cry alone in a hotel room, but please do engage your keyboard and play that theme song.
And action. Have you ever seen
In the Mood for Love? Ni hao and ngoy for downloading the 490th edition of this spoiler-laden classic movies podcast known as Have You Ever Seen? I'm the newspaper man who has a roving eye and also a secret I'll only share with a hole, Ryan Ellis. And here's the nattily-dressed lady who sheds tears because she knows her own propriety and restraint won't allow her to do what makes her happy. My wife, Bev.
That's me.
You married me, you should have married somebody else. Because you had to live in quiet desperation. That's not true. Bad joke on myself. But this does begin the month of Crazy Stupid Love. February is the month of Valentine's Day after all. We called it the month of Strangelove last year, so a different name this year. We're not covering Dr. Strangelove, or last year we didn't, because we already have. And Crazy Stupid Love, that movie, probably not going to do that this year. All the movies we're planning to discuss in the next 4 weeks are about obsessive or at least overly passionate romances. some of which at least have the decency to be funny about it. And we apologize in advance if we mangle the names today or if we mix up the first name, last name thing. I've heard him called Wong Kar-wai, the director, writer, producer, for about 20 years, so that sounds more right to me than Kar-wai Wong does, but that is what it says online, so we'll try to remember that, but we're probably going to bone that up a few times. Okay, the coming attractions opinion question for In the Mood for Love. The film was released in America in 2001, so it would have been nominated for the Oscar for foreign language film that year, not in 2000, which is when Hong Kong, France, and so on first saw it. Some of the other 2001 nominees for Best Foreign Language Film are great, including Amelie, which we've covered, and the winner of the award, No Man's Land. Let's throw Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon into this mix because it won the Foreign Language Film Oscar, and that's of course what it was called back then. The International Film Oscar was a pretty recent change. So Crouching Tiger won the year before, and it shares plenty of themes, in fact, with this movie, In the Mood for Love. Which is your favorite of all of those? All that big build-up, and I know what Bev's going to say.
I know, it's Crouching Tiger. I love Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah, me too. That's my choice. But Amelie is a close second, and I have a lot of respect for In the Mood for Love and No Man's Land, too. But you haven't seen No Man's Land.
I've never seen that, no.
When it won, I was surprised. Then I saw the movie months or even a year later and thought, okay, I can see why they chose this movie. But then War over Love. And Amelie was so well known and so well liked, and everyone seemed to be talking about it. Had a lot of buzz in 2001, but didn't win the Oscar. And of course, this wasn't even nominated. In fact, In the Mood for Love got no nominations of any kind. We'll get to that in a second. The film was released in Hong Kong on September 29th, 2000. That was after it showed at Cannes and TIFF earlier in the year. It started playing on the big screen over here in March 2001, like I said, and the film grossed somewhere between $13 and $14 million worldwide, so that's not bad at all. But Bev, I've been talking for a long time. It's your turn. Please give us a skinny on In the Mood for Love.
Maggie Cheung and Tony Leung are Mrs. Chan and Mr. Chow, neighbors in a tightly packed Hong Kong apartment building in the early 60s. Heartbroken by the discovery that their spouses are having an affair with each other, Mrs. Chan and Mr. Chow comfort one another by play-acting the love affair over and over, obsessing together over the details of how two people may have fallen in love, and in the process, they fall in love with each other. But they never act on their feelings, determined to be the bigger people. They never give in like their spouses do, and instead are forced to separate and find healing on their own.
Or, in a nutshell, eat, flirt, man, woman.
Wasn't one of the possible names for this movie?
Eating?
Eating? Yeah, it was something
Dinner
to do with that.
Again?
It was like feelings over noodles or something. Secrets over noodles, I think, may have been.
Really? Seriously?
Well, secrets there was definitely a food-related one. Shoot, I wish I wrote it down.
We'll share secrets while we eat noodles, so over noodles. I didn't know if it meant secrets are greater than noodles.
No, nothing's greater than noodles. Especially the noodles in this movie. Doesn't it make you want noodles when they're steaming coming out of their thermoses? God, the food looks so great in this movie. Well, some of it does. Some of it not so much.
Almost everything looks great in this movie. And they do eat a lot, even more than they flirt. Okay, well, the numbers on this film, there's some very big ones here, and this is the main reason we've been covering this movie at all. The Rotten Tomatoes numbers are quite good. 91% of critics like the film. 8 out of 10 is the average. There are 145 reviews on the site, and 94% of audiences. It was 170th at the 2001 U.S. box office. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. We covered that a long time ago. That was number 2. Legally Blonde was 22, and Amelie was 71st. Okay, here we go. In the Mood for Love was second on BBC Culture's Top 100 list in 2016. Number 1 was Mulholland Drive. In the Mood for Love was 5th on Sight and Sound's list about 2 months ago. It even outranked Mulholland Drive. 5th. No Oscar nominations, like I said, but nothing for the sets, the cinematography, or the costumes. The film did win the Technical Grand Prize, and Tony Leung won Best Actor at Cannes in 2000, so at least there's that. And maybe they liked that more anyway. Maybe that meant more to them. But there you go. BBC Culture, okay, fine, that's not quite so revered. But Sight and Sound, they've been doing this since 1952. We all know about the Gene Dealman movie. We'll talk about that sometime this year. We hope to see it at some point, and maybe we'll just review it, or at least bring it up in a YouTube video. But this being 5th was almost as much of a shock as that, because it's the newest movie. Well, I guess Mulholland Drive's newer, but it's lower ranked. They're both in the top 10. I love Mulholland Drive. I respect the hell out of this movie. But man, that top 10 list has got some very debatable choices to be in the top 10, not so much to make the list somewhere at all. In the Mood for Love, number 5. What do you think about that? Or number 2, BBC Culture.
I want to add that the BBC Culture list is not the best movies ever made. It's the best movies of the 21st century so far. And it was a list that was made in 2016.
So they had 15 years, basically, 16 years.
It was like a brand new way to think of ranking movies. So the list kind of made the news just because they were the first people to really try to do it. So their list is now the blueprint from which we consider other lists about movies in the 21st century. I think a lot of people easily agreed with them. So when people were making their lists for the Sight and Sound, they were probably considering things like Mulholland Drive and In the Mood for Love, because they would have been on their mind, and it's been already raised to this echelon of high esteem of more contemporary films. Helps that they were both movies that were made in the very early 21st century, movies that were released in the year 2000 and the year 2001. This movie stands alone. It's a work of art. It is so sensual. It's breathtakingly gorgeous. It's a feast for the senses, beginning to end. There's so much to admire and really enjoy about the technical elements. Of course, these beautiful actors and the gorgeous clothes. I could watch 2 hours of just these two passing each other on the stairs in slow motion with that music playing. That said, while I see what everyone else sees in this movie,
No, you don't.
I feel nothing. Oh, no, I see it.
Okay.
I feel nothing. It keeps me at arm's length. I never root for a certain outcome. The only thing it makes me feel is truly admiration. I really admire this film, but I could take or leave it personally. I don't want to imply that I don't like it. I like it a lot, but you read these reviews and you hear what people think of this movie, and they have so much love for it, and they feel these feelings. They are really invested in these characters, and it just never happens for me.
Do you think people, well, everyone does, I guess, but has a person in their life, maybe even more than one, but probably one, they didn't act on some feelings, maybe because one or both of them were married, like these characters, and they relate to that? Because otherwise, I don't get why they're so invested in this movie.
I don't typically need to have the exact same experience as a character to be carried along with the story. I find that it's actually very easy for me to relate to characters even when they're in completely foreign situations. And this movie's also right up my alley.
Yeah.
I love doomed love affairs. So many of my favorite films.
You love Hong Kong.
I love Hong Kong.
You respect Hong Kong. You know nothing about it, really.
I have no real opinion about Hong Kong, especially in the 60s. You would agree, this movie should appeal to me in every single way, but it really keeps me at arm's length. It's so delicate, it's so restrained that I feel alienated, and I can intellectually sympathize with them, but I just have no emotional connection. It just never happens for me. I was happy to see that I'm not alone. There's a plethora of video essays and words written about this movie. People really love to dig in and chew the meat off this bone. It's a very great movie to talk about if you love cinema, and especially if you're interested in directing, because I think the visual language in this film is so sophisticated. That's part of what makes it so exciting for people who love film. But I was happy to see that even people who could admire this film like I do can admit that they just don't feel it. It comes across as cold in the end. Intellectually, It's a super interesting movie, but not everyone seems to be able to reach that, while other people are so moved by it and get so caught up in the story. And maybe it is because it's something they can relate to more so than I can. Although, who hasn't had an unrequited love?
I think one of the frustrations with this, especially from Mrs. Chan, so Sue, it says, S-U, Sue Lijian, he wants more, and she does too. He openly wants more than she does. And I get why she doesn't want to be like them. I think that's the exact quote. Let's not be like them, meaning the spouses. But there comes a point when you're this crazy about each other, which they do seem to be, and you've been working together on this martial arts thing he wants to do. So you're co-writers. That could have been a nutshell as well. Co-writer or something or other. Taking the moral high ground is great. But if your spouses really are having an affair, and it's now been a long time, and they still are, what are you trying to prove? This has nothing to do with religion that they ever say. But it almost feels like people have been told that God's watching, you can't ever masturbate or whatever. You can't do that one wrong thing, so people listen to that forever, and they feel tortured lives. That could be what it is, too. Maybe it's not so much about a lost romance or a non-ever-happening romance, but how you've had to be restrained from doing something you wanted to do and didn't because someone told you you couldn't. No one ever said she couldn't, but I'm guessing that they must have at some point, because why is her moral compass this overwhelmingly strong when her husband's been cheating with his wife?
So I think the movie answers the question for us, especially in its visual language. A lot of people, when they talk about this movie, talk about the frames within frames. The mise-en-scène, the way that the set is designed, and the way that it's shot is so that we always see our characters within doorways, windows, mirror reflections, or even if it's a more abstract way of framing it to have them in a frame, it's a lamp in the foreground, it's another actor in the foreground. They're always being seen inside another frame. And what that does is it creates a voyeuristic experience for the audience. We always look like we're spying on them. We're always reminded that we are a viewer and they're just living their lives, and we're like a documentary film crew just trying to stay out of the way. Oh, forget we're here. And that's a reminder that they are being watched, that there is some very strong societal societal norms that are dictating their behavior. It's illustrated over and over in how careful they have to be, especially that scene near the middle of the movie when the landlords come home to play mahjong all night and she's stuck in his room and they just have to sit there and kill time until she has an opportunity to leave, because if she's seen leaving, it doesn't matter what they did in there. Propriety dictates that they've already broken enough rules that it could ruin them. The consequences must be very steep for them to go as far as to just hide in that room for what seems like almost 24 hours. They're there forever.
And those old biddies would definitely talk.
Well, that's just it. So there must be a real social consequence to getting caught, and propriety really drives a lot of what they do. I think that when she says we can't be like them, we have to be better than them, we're not going to do what they do. I know the movie tells us we ought to root for them to fall in love because they're beautiful, because it's slow motion, because this plaintive, gorgeous score is playing. Obviously, they ought to be in love, but should they be? What is connecting them? What's connecting them is pain. Pain because the people they actually love have betrayed them and might be in love with each other, might be abandoning them. So everything that bonds them is this trauma response. And what do? Is this romantic, what they're doing? No, it's actually crazy. I read this great quote or description by the director, Wong. He made this great point that the dark side of these characters is kind of hidden by the casting, because you cast these beautiful, popular actors, and then there's just a simple notion that, of course, their spouses are the villains. So he said, sure, when you see Tony Leung asking Maggie Chung to pretend to be his unfaithful wife while he falls in love with her, you have sympathy for him. But imagine the part was recast with someone like John Malkovich. Then we'd all think he was a real creep. This movie's super influenced by Vertigo. He says in Vertigo, you have somebody acting like a first-class creep. Everything that Jimmy Stewart does in that movie is despicable, but we forgive him because he's Jimmy Stewart, and that's part of what makes that movie really complicated and beautiful, and a bit of a condemnation of the audience themselves for spying on them, for watching
Vertigo's
them,
all about that too.
Yeah, and for forgiving these characters who are actually doing bad things, especially the way Vertigo ends.
And Vertigo was number 1 on the list in 2012, and I think it's still 2 or 3. I think it's number 2 on this most recent list. So that means it's number 2 and number 5 with very similar themes.
So, of course, people who love Vertigo would love In the Mood for Love. He's explicitly stated that he was heavily influenced by Vertigo while making this film. The look is obvious. They're both really rich and full of these symbolic
Vertigo's one of the best looking movies ever, too.
The green in Vertigo, you get the red in The Mood for Love, this thematic color that just becomes part of the story, and it's so gorgeous. And they're also both films about people literally play acting a relationship so that they can dwell on trauma. And in neither case would I say that this act that they do to soothe themselves, is it healing? No.
Okay, here's a big question. But is it possible that they're wrong?
That they're not having an affair?
That the other two, his wife and her husband, aren't actually having an affair. We never see their faces. We hear their voices a little bit, and we see him from behind. And apparently this original cut was a lot longer. I like that this movie's an hour and 30 some odd minutes long, an hour 38 or something. It could have been longer, and that'd be fine. A 2-hour movie with this topic would be okay. But I like that Wong cut it down so much. And I guess one thing that was sacrificed was seeing those two faces. They do exist. I don't think the movie's saying these two aren't married.
We see them, we see the backs of them.
Right, and we hear their voices. So they are real. But are they actually having an affair? Because the dinner, where Chow and Chan figure out what's going on, they don't have proof. Isn't it more like speculation?
It is a bunch of coincidences, or it could be circumstantial, the evidence. But we do, as the audience, see Mrs. Chow talking on the phone with somebody. God, no, you're right. It all's a little bit oblique, isn't it?
Now, if they were going to do that, get together like this and have this affair of the heart, if you will, then again, I was going to say, why wouldn't they go all the way if they think their spouses are going all the way with each other? But let's just say they're making that up for the sake of this argument. But then why would they not do that themselves? So I guess that does defeat that point.
I don't think that they're in it to fall in love. I think they're in it to wallow in their sadness.
I was going to use that word, wallow.
Have you ever just been heartbroken?
Yeah, and I've wallowed.
And you wallowed, and somebody might have advice for how to snap out of it and feel better, and you're like, I don't want to feel better.
I'm not immune to self-pity.
Yeah, I want to feel outraged. I want somebody to wallow in my outrage with me. I want somebody to never get sick of talking about this, because guess what? It's all I'm going to think about for the next month.
I've done that.
So yeah, we have all been so hung up on our pain, and there is a pleasure in that pain. We talked about this with Inside Llewyn Davis. This is a man who is happy in his pain. He does not...
He needs his pain.
but he does not want it to go away, and he seems to be actively trying to make it stay, to make his misery last longer.
You could say the same with Jackson Maine in A Star is Born.
Yes, there's a word for it that my friend who works in mental health told me, and I overuse all the time now, and it's perseverating, where you talk about something without really healing from it. Like, I think that they're perseverating, just circling around and around in this thing that they can't move on from because they don't really want to move on
Well,
from.
they go through their lines, the characters, not the actors, but as it's written in the screenplay, they're going through lines of how they would confront the other spouse, especially her doing that with him. So she's the one working on what she would say to her husband. We don't know that she ever did it. She probably didn't confront him. But that's a weird thing to do, too, unless you really are going to confront him. And maybe she thought she would when she was working on her lines with Chow. But that's a strange thing to do, though, too.
Everything they do is strange. The whole way that they're performing out how their spouses may have met and fall in love. What a strange thing to do.
Well, it's also that Ping, Chow's friend, says he saw Chow's wife with a man on the street, which we do project back to being Mr. Chan. But how does he know who that was? And maybe he made it up or something.
That's a good take. I never really thought about this before, but you're totally right.
He could have been misunderstanding what it was. It could have been that she was just talking to somebody about directions in the street or something like that, and it looked like they were together. It could. Also, Ping leaves a hat at Chan's place. Costanza. You don't know Seinfeld that well, but George does that in one of the episodes where he deliberately leaves something behind, so he has to be called to come get the thing, and then he stays in the lady's mind. He says, Costanza. And later on in that episode, the woman does do that. So it worked. It's a conniving thing to do, but it did work. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence about this. And this is just an element I didn't really read in the trivia on IMDb or Wiki. And I'm just wondering, why isn't that being talked about? That maybe they're just wrong about what's really going on. And if they are, then what is the point of all this? And if you're not going to cheat when you clearly want to. One thing that's fascinating about this movie, too, is that Maggie Cheung is a very good-looking woman, of course. And the costume, she's a 19 out of 10, really. These are some of the best costumes anyone's ever designed for any movie ever. She wears so many different outfits. Where she puts all these clothes, I don't know.
But she only has like maybe about 10 dresses, and they're all the exact same style, but these different beautiful.
Well, she's so small, it wouldn't take up much room in the closet, I guess. That's a good point.
Well, there's that too. The dress specifically, I'm going to mispronounce this, but it's called kipao, and it was very stylish at the time, a Cantonese style of dress. And Maggie Cheung said that it was a way of understanding her character, whose strength is so quiet and restrained, because the dress itself is very restrictive. You can tell by looking at it, they're not very comfortable.
It's buttoned up to the chin.
I can't even imagine. If that's a weave, sitting down in that would be uncomfortable.
She's so sexy, and yet you don't really see her body exposed.
But
not
you
that
see her body. She's so beautiful and sexy in those dresses. But they are still a reflection of the societal restrictions. You know, they're so buttoned up. The dress is beautiful, but it's limiting, and it makes her stiff and restrained.
You know what? Getting back to the Sight and Sound list again, because we are covering this partly for that reason. We wanted to cover some of those movies this year. We'll probably do a couple, 2 or 3 maybe. And the top 10 on that list is so much about Forbidden Love. We don't know about Jean Dielman yet. We haven't seen it. But this, Mulholland Drive, definitely, right? Mm-hmm. Beau Travail, was it Travail? I watched that when the list came out. I had never seen it before. It was on YouTube, I think, so I saw it. Definitely about forbidden love, and also a secret love like this is. Vertigo, we already said that. Citizen Kane to some degree is about those kinds of things. So I guess people that vote on movies really like the torture of films and maybe feeling it themselves. Look at Martin Scorsese. The kinds of movies he was making when he was going through his best phase, we learned later on, I've read it in books many times, that he was a serious drug addict. He almost died before Raging Bull got made, and then he made that movie almost like, I'm Jake. I'm torturing myself, but I'm also torturing other people, literally hurting them, but also psychologically hurting them. And when you do that as much as he was doing it, and maybe in some ways he kept on without the drugs and alcohol all these years since, the 40 or so years since, there's got to be a part of you that's driven to be this way, even if you are hurting other people. So the top 10 of the Sight and Sound is so much about romantic and love pain.
But isn't that just the best? I get it. There is such an appeal to these stories, to this kind of heartbreak. Of course, the pursuit of love and companionship is a deeply human and universal thing, so it's easy to have high stakes when it comes to that. Then, I don't know, what is juicier than love that is forbidden?
Well, also, number 10 on the list, Singing in the Rain, where it does work out.
That movie's actually an anomaly on the top of that list because it is such a cheerful popcorn Hollywood film.
And by the way, looking at my notes here, I did write down that they say they never met each other's spouses. That was early on. You could argue that as the months were on, maybe they stumbled across each other in the hallway, because so much of the early part of the film is Chow and Chan going past each other in the hallway politely, going to their rooms. And this is a boarding house, right? So I guess you have to share most everything. You have your own bedroom, and it looks like maybe they have their own bathrooms as well, but you got to share the kitchen and living room, which is why she can't go to her room when they're playing mahjong, because she'd be seen. But it's a strange thing, too, because all 4 people are working in these 2 marriages. Why are they so poor that they live in a house with to share most of the facilities?
Oh, it's because this was Hong Kong in the 60s. It was so densely packed, densely populated, that it simply came down to the fact that there weren't enough apartments for everybody to have their own apartment. So it's not really a rooming house. It's that these families own these apartments and they would let out one room in their apartment, kind of like roommates, and make an income that way. But it was just how people were forced to live, even if they had money. They're not broke at all.
They eat out a lot.
They eat out a lot. Well, you kind of have to. You don't have a kitchen.
Not your own kitchen, anyway.
Look at the way she dresses. Look at the way she puts herself together. That's such a big indication of her character, too. Never a hair out of place.
I read that she was in makeup and, of course, the costuming for hours in the morning. I forget how many hours it was, but it was a lot. And I remember thinking when I saw that, okay, an hour, maybe it's a couple of hours. But it's not like she's wearing some kind of odd makeup in some horror movie or something like that.
There's no prosthetics happening
So
here.
I guess they wanted to get so specific. But why the costume would take so long to do that? Unless they were just redoing it or maybe sewing her into it.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing.
She Done Him Wrong. I covered that late last month. Didn't like it very much at all. But Mae West apparently was sewn into her costumes. Partly because she was so curvy and you can get away with showing more of her. But then you see a lot of Maggie Cheung's curves in this movie too. Wong Kar-wai Wong, whatever, loves her bottom.
Oh, yeah. So do I.
I do too.
Come on.
But he shows it a lot.
She should have won an Oscar just for her walk. I was so mesmerized.
I was surprised, actually, that Tony Leung won an award at Cannes for acting. Because he's good in the movie, for sure. But I think she's even better, and she didn't win an award. Is that sexism?
Well, I don't know. It could just be the field of competition at the time.
That could be.
But I agree. I think she stands out. Maybe because you just simply cannot take your eyes off of her. But I think beyond the restraint, beyond all the emotions that she has to convey with so few words and even so few actions, they don't give stuff away with their eyes the way that most actors do. I always think a good actor doesn't really act natural, because when someone's acting natural, you can't tell what's going on in their mind. A good actor has to be able to convey what's going on in their mind to the audience in a way that if they did that in the real world, we would all be like, wow, you didn't find that joke very funny, or, oh. People, when they're acting well, are actually exaggerating. But she doesn't. Yes. She acts incredibly authentic, so that when she passes Mr. Chow on the staircase and they look at each other and they reveal nothing in their expression, but we only know from the slow motion, from the music, that this is a significant moment, but we can't tell from their face. And she still manages to convey a lot of emotion in her face, but her body language in this deserves an award. Just the way she's so careful, but so sensual, but never vulgar. It's so measured and precise and perfect.
And he is very good in the film, too. I didn't want to make it sound like he's not. I like how he sleeps in the chair in his room when she stayed for the night. He's that proper. That's not even a matter of, we won't touch each other, I won't grab your boob. He sleeps in the chair in his own room. And no one would know. Well, she's not even supposed to be there, according to them. They have no idea. But no one would know if they slept beside each other and did or did not do anything. But that's how proper he is, even in private. And also, we talked about costumes, and this is a much more simple thing to wear. But Tony Leung wears the hell out of those muscle shirts. I guess we call them wife beaters. I hate that expression. The white muscle shirt.
Yeah, he sure does. Listen, she is gorgeous. He is also gorgeous. These two people are so
And he
good-looking.
says to her at one point in the film, and maybe about an hour in, he's in love. And I don't think she says it, but is she in love?
I can't remember if she ever says
She doesn't.
it.
That's why I'm asking you.
Oh.
He says it, she doesn't.
100% she's in love.
Why wouldn't she say it to him when he just said it to her?
Because she still loves her husband? Because she's in denial? Because maybe she understands better than him that they shouldn't be together?
Well, also, I've got a note here in my notes. We watched the movie a week ago, so I think it's her that says it. I could be wrong because it's been a week, but this isn't real. So, what isn't real? Are we suggesting they didn't, well, they got together? This movie's not saying that they weren't real people, they didn't actually see each other. We're speculating, and maybe it's true that the other spouses weren't with each other. We don't know for sure. That could be wrong. But what about this isn't real?
I just thought it was
maybe
her.
The love isn't real.
I considered it her lamenting on how their play acting wasn't doing anything to make them feel better. This isn't real. What are we bothering with this for? It's not getting us anywhere, and I still hurt more than ever. And the closer she would get to believing in what they were doing, just the more she was accessing her pain. well, if this isn't working anymore, we have to make a decision whether we want to be together or not. And I could potentially lose you in this little weird thing that we're doing together. Then I have to face what's really happening in my life, which is that my husband is stepping out on me, maybe doesn't love me anymore. I think she's just in so much pain.
The last 20 or so minutes are fascinating. She calls him when he's at a newspaper office, because that's what he does for a living. I think you said that, right? He's a newspaper
he's
person.
A journalist.
And she's an assistant or secretary, what have you, for a shipping company. So she calls him in Singapore. That's 1963, so a couple of years after the movie started, but doesn't say anything. Interesting touch. The movie could have ended right there. But then they have more story, because 3 years after that, now we're in the Vietnam War, 1966, he goes to Cambodia. And we see some real footage as well of what's going on in that part of the world.
Yeah,
Cambodia,
documentary
Vietnam.
footage of de Gaulle visiting Cambodia.
Mm-hmm. And he puts his secret in the hole. He talked about that earlier with Ping, that you go to Cambodia, you confess your secret to a tree hole or something he said there. In this case, it's a hole in a wall, and then you stuff it with mud, and it stays there forever. That was the perfect way to end the movie. Go to black. You don't need to see shots of the temple, I don't think. And then you start the movie with a graphic that explains stuff, and it's all this flowery language, and then you end it. I think it's all about her at the beginning and him at the end with what's being described. I don't need any of that. Show the hole being packed with that mud, fade to black or cut to black or something. The rest of it just seemed extraneous, and that actually annoyed me more than anything else in this movie. What are you doing? You had a perfect ending.
Okay, I agree with you, but I've been thinking about this so much because you said the same when the movie ended, and you were like, why didn't they just fade to black right there? Why do they keep carrying on for a few shots? And the shots that you're talking about, the temple is called
B-roll.
Angkor Wat. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
That's close.
It's a very famous Buddhist temple in Cambodia, one of the most famous Buddhist temples, centuries old. And the remaining shots of the movie are just shots of the temple, these really open shots of the blue sky as well. And so, like you, it did not make any sense to me. The perfect shot could be the hole filled with dirt. But I thought those shots at the end, they really stick out from the rest of the movie because they're so wide open, because you see the sky, it's daytime, it's clear. And the rest of the film is downright claustrophobic.
True.
We're in rooms inside of rooms.
When we're outside, it's rainy or nighttime.
Oh, yeah, it's always nighttime, and these skinny hallways, and always people on top of each other. And then you have this vast difference. So I wonder if what we're seeing there, what that's a visual representation of, is Mr. Chow releasing.
He's free, okay.
He's free. He's finally found closure. The world is going to open up for the first time since that year in Hong Kong when his wife broke his heart. So they've both moved on with their lives. I think that's what it's meant to be implying. But like a lot of stuff in this film, is difficult to interpret. And we're not alone. The internet is full of video essays and essays of people interpreting this film. A lot of it is guesswork and speculation, or just how I interpret it, how it seems to me. It's made in a way that I guess is supposed to be a little open to interpretation. We haven't talked about the way the production went. It was like 15 months long, and they wrote it on the fly. There was a lot of improvisation. They shot it in all these different locations, and then he had to put the film together from a lot of footage. So it's like he wrote the script in the edit bay as well. Everything was very last minute and over schedule, and they were racing it to Cannes when it was done.
Well, I think they had better endings.
I agree with you.
It reminds me of Shawshank, because the studio wanted Darabont to have closure on this, because the movie, well, the screenplay at least, ends with, I hope the Pacific is as blue as it has been in my dreams. I hope. With the shot of the bus going down the street, because he says he's going to try to get across the border. We know that anyway. But he's made clear he's going to go try to find Andy. But then the studio said, we want to see him find Andy. And I love that ending. I'm glad they did that. But one of the things Darabont did was, A, you're going to spend some money for this if you want to do this. B, we're going to go to some beautiful place in Mexico, or wherever they went. Maybe it wasn't Mexico. It's where they're supposed to be. Maybe it's California, whatever. Beautiful ocean. But yes, it also does feel open for once, because we have a lot of overhead shots and open shots, quote unquote, in Shawshank, but the whole time they're surrounded by a prison. The only time they're ever out is when they're under armed guard doing work that the warden is benefiting from. So maybe it's the same basic logic there. In the Mood for Love is a better example, though, than even that of feeling truly claustrophobic, because yes, we are mostly inside or at night being rained on. Now, her ending, though, last time we see her is when she's gone back to the boarding house and has a son. So what happens next? Well, they continue living lives of quiet desperation, although maybe not if he feels free now. Okay, there's that. But also Mrs. Chan, Sue, has a little Chan now. So maybe being a mom is enough to make her at least a little happy. I assume it's her husband's son. Probably. This woman didn't cheat with the guy she was in love with, so she's not going to cheat with somebody else. And I don't know if she'd be remarried that fast and have a kid who's whatever age at this point. So it's probably Chan's kid, but she's back at the boarding house, which he went to see too and just didn't know she was there. That's a Dr. Zhivago ending. He's right there!
Yeah,
but she doesn't know.
There's such close misses. There's several in a row. The ending, they keep almost being together and missing each other by minutes or seconds.
I wonder what they'd say anyway, because she probably would still not be with him.
Although they would be free to be together at this point.
Well, is she not with her husband? Is that what they said?
They said the woman who lives next door, it's a woman and her child. There's no mention of a husband.
That's right.
So she must be single. He seems to be single. I guess it's a possibility, but then you have to wonder, do they have anything to really bond them together now that they've moved on with their lives?
They don't have their pain anymore.
Yeah, no, seriously. And maybe that's what the movie's implying. The structure is so weird. It's confusing. It jumps around without filling in gaps that could help explain things like how did they end up having that first dinner together? How long has this affair been going on? How long does their friendship even go on for? The structure makes a first viewing really confusing. Like the first time I saw this movie, I couldn't really put together what had happened until it was all over and I was thinking about it after the fact.
Oh, if you blink, by the way, and miss or if the subtitles aren't very good, you wouldn't notice that he says, I think it's him that says it, when did they start getting together? However it's phrased, but it's one sentence. And if you missed that for some reason, you'd never know that they know, or they suspect, that their spouses are together.
Yeah, and then you could be very easily...
Okay, you would later on, I guess. Sorry.
Sure, but you could still be really easily confused, even when you do catch on to that line, and they're doing these long scenes of pretending to be each other's spouse. It always takes you a minute to catch up and catch on to what they're doing. So you're always playing catch up, trying to figure out what you're looking at in one scene to the other. And you don't know what's happened in the interim, the scenes that we're not seeing. Why is she now practicing confronting her husband? What happened to push her to this point that she wants to push
after
to
months
confrontation?
Of being together.
It could be weeks, it could be months, it could be a year. So it's really disorienting. And the structure is designed not to resemble a story one might tell to someone else, but more like a series of memories one might recall about a difficult year and a strange relationship that you went through. So the scenes are like these snapshots. They might even focus on one specific detail, like the driving rain or a particular meal that was served. Just
the
like
mustard
a real
scene, wherever that was?
Yes, they spend almost a minute or two just eating in silence, and there's all this focus paid to the food, and you can think, well, I remember this dinner I had once years ago, and I ate this steak or this spicy duck, and there was this mustard that he insisted I try. And they're all foods that they wouldn't normally order because they were ordering what the spouse would have ordered. So the focus is kind of like a recreation of experiencing a memory. So you could say in a way the movie all takes place in the mid to late 60s when they're thinking about this affair of the heart that they shared, how the memories accumulate to make a story and which details end up being important to them, which moments, passing on the stairs, that tension and that drama and that attraction that they have to one another in their heads alone at that point before they really have an opportunity to get to know each other.
Two things have been compared to the Sight and Sound listed, again, the top 10 at least. Jean Dielman apparently has a lot of scenes where she just makes coffee or goes to the bank, goes to the post office.
Yeah, this is why we haven't seen it yet.
In real time. But procedurally is what that's all about. And that's what you're talking about with some of the scenes in the Mood for Love. And the other comparison I'll make right now is we talked about them rehearsing lines with their spouses that they probably never say to the spouses, but it's like they're working it out. Well, Mulholland Drive. There's that great audition scene, but before she does it with the guy in the director's or maybe producer's office, one of the greatest acting scenes that Naomi Watts has ever done, that's saying something, or maybe anyone's ever done, partly because we see her working out the scene earlier in the day, and it sounds like terrible dialogue. But then when she does it with him and she's selling it, I wanted to see that movie that they were supposed to be making within Mulholland Drive. And one more comparison, this isn't in the top 10, but I'm almost certain it's on all of the various lists. Taxi Driver. There's a scene where he is facing the camera and it stops and restarts. He's rehearsing the lines. Listen, you blankheads, you screwheads, you did... And he screws up like I just did and starts again. And then you talking to me in the mirror is him rehearsing lines he wants to say to the Secret Service guys. So this movie is homaging other films, and maybe it's being homaged by other films since, or has been. I didn't think of all this stuff till right now. This has got more depth than I thought. But again, we come back to the same point, which is these two actors are beautiful. They're talented. They were both in Hero in 2002, which we covered last year. Came out over here later, but it was in 2002. It came out in, I guess, China, Hong Kong, what have you. And in that film, Tony Leung is killed by Maggie Cheung because they were lovers, and he betrays the vision that she thought they had, but then she kills herself. We covered the movie last year. It's almost 20. It is 20 years old, so I don't care about spoilers. But anyway, they were together basically a year, well, maybe 2 years later as lovers again. But this time they'd been together, and then one kills the other one. It's funny, too, her resume, there's a lot of movies on there, but some of the ones that stood out, Police Story and Super Cop.
Oh, yeah.
I don't really know most of the movies she's been in, but I know those two titles, and they're both obviously police movies. And then he was in Hard Boiled and Infernal Affairs. He's one of the two main guys in that. And we, of course, covered The Departed, which is based on Infernal Affairs.
Isn't he the bad guy in Shang-Chi, that Marvel movie?
Yeah, he's Zhu Wenwu, Tony Leung. Okay, there you go. So that's actually one of the bigger titles. I looked right past that, I guess, when I was looking up his
Probably
resume.
Made more money for that than all of his Chinese credits combined.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know.
So the director, Kar-Wai Wong, or Wong Kar-Wai, his resume is not that I'm aware of impressive. I don't really know these titles. I know 2046. The 2 stars are in that too. And then he made The Grand Master with Leung, which interestingly was an Oscar nominee for costumes for the editor of this movie. William Chang edited this and 2046, and he got an Oscar nomination for the costumes on The Grand Master.
What?
That's what I read online.
Wow, that's versatility.
And Wong did write and produce this movie, as he tends to do. He's not sure. He writes, directs, and produces his movies.
This movie was also part of what's considered to be a trilogy with 2046 and Days of Being Wild.
Okay.
Part of the reason why this movie can be difficult for people the way it is for us, it needs to be seen in the context of all of his other films, but especially the trilogy, because they speak a shared language. So it just might make more sense to us if we knew his work better. Have you seen any of his other films?
I think I may have seen 2046, but I'm not even sure about that.
Yeah, I've never seen any of his other
I don't
films.
even recognize most of the titles in the sense of,
Yeah.
oh, I haven't seen that. It's a matter of, I've never heard of it till right now.
No, I've definitely heard of Chungking Express.
Oh, that's his? Okay.
It's a huge blind spot for me. This is the first or the only of his films that I've ever
I looked
seen.
right past that too on his resume.
And I should add that this film is really popular with directors, and I can see why. It accomplishes so much with just its visual language alone. There's so much vision and care put into every frame, and he's such a beautiful visual storyteller. That is just such a special skill, and I can see why directors would love that. And of course, directors are a lot of the voters on Sight and Sound.
Oh, sure. This could easily be a silent film.
Big time. In a way, it almost is. I feel like the score does more than the dialogue.
A little repetitive, that score, but it's pretty
I
decent.
love it, though. It's so beautiful.
So the movie's 166-1. We saw the Criterion print on Turner Classic Movies. Cinematographer, there were 3 of them. Christopher Doyle, who also shot Hero for Zhang Yimou a couple years later.
One of the most beautiful movies ever made.
That's on the running, too. It's true. Most of the best-looking movies of the 2000s were the Asian guys making them. So this film, and then a few by Zhang Yimou, or Yimou Zhang. The other 2 cinematographers were Ping Bin Lee and Pun Leung Kwan. Doyle is not the only cinematographer because he had to leave. You talked about the long shoot. He had other things he had to do. He had other commitments, so he had to leave.
The 15-month-long shoot.
Whenever you see multiple cinematographers on a movie, my first thought is, well, they must have had a fight and somebody got fired, or the guy quit. But sometimes it's a matter of, look, I got to go do something else. I'm already committed.
He came back for another movie, I think it was 2046, and he had to leave again because that movie went over schedule. Say what you want about Wong Kar-Wai, it sounds like he might have been a little frustrating to work with.
Oh, I
His
bet.
style of working seems pretty hard to manage.
The music was by Michael Galasso and Shigeru Umebayashi. Umebayashi worked on 2046 and The Grand Master. And then we already said the costume should certainly have been nominated for an Oscar. Probably should have won the Oscar that year. Probably the cinematography, maybe the editing, and probably the sets. Well, maybe not so much the sets, I guess, but they were good too. But those costumes, man.
You got to give credit to the editing because they wrote the script in the edit suite.
And we always appreciate a short movie. And this was.
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay, then last thoughts on In the Mood for Love.
So I hesitated to be honest about how much I
You should
personally
never be
struggled.
No, you should never do that.
No, I should never do it because it was such a relief when I was doing my research and I found other people admitting that even if they admired this film, they just couldn't get into it. So I just had to be honest about it with everybody that this was a struggle for me, even as a person who loves films and loves movies like this. But there was still so much to appreciate. It's been a really fun movie to talk about and to think about and to research. And I feel smarter for trying to figure it out than I did before I did a deep dive. So there's tons to appreciate. And I'm just not going to like everything, and that's okay. I'm not going to like everything that everybody says is a great movie. No, you're right, because I do like it a lot. I'm not going to always feel every single movie. I don't have to, I guess.
That's true, yeah. It's a dream to look at. The actors do a good job of playing desperate restraint, and I like it. It's just that we're watching this with the proviso that it's so revered by BBC Culture and Sight and Sound, and that's part of my problem.
It never helps.
Whenever somebody makes a movie sound like it's unbelievable, this Gene Dealman movie cannot possibly be as good as number one. That's not fair maybe when I haven't seen it, but the greatest movie of all time, really. This is the movie you want to watch over and over again. 3 hours and 20 minutes of what that's supposed to be about. Haven't seen it. I know. Fair. Fine. But come on. Some of these movies that made the top anything on that list, I've watched so many of them. I've been just going through like a madman since early December. This being on the list, I can respect. Top 10, I don't really understand. Top 5, I really don't understand, even though I think it's very good. But I think these lists have really overrated it. And I don't want to be one of those people that says, I hate it. I'm not like that, and you know that. But maybe there's at least a part of me in this case that feels like, fold my arms and this can't be that good. I don't want to be that way, but come on.
About In the Mood for Love or about...
In the Mood for Love and Jean Dielman and even that Beau Travail movie, which I had never seen until 2 months ago, I guess. You know what it was? It was a show me. Prove it to me they're this good, and they weren't.
It's always hard to come to a movie from that angle, but I think that trying to understand what's good about a movie that you don't like is a great way to challenge yourself as a film appreciator.
Yeah, okay.
But sometimes it's really frustrating, and I feel that way about other movies. I mean, I feel that way about a movie that you and I disagree about, Raging Bull, a movie I've never been able to like on any level, but it's one of your favorites and one of critics' favorites.
One of my favorites, but I'm surprised at how much that movie is dropped on lists like the Sight and Sound.
I think that it's trends. These things go in and out of vogue. It's rating art. It's impossible. It's not like athletics, and even that could have different ways of measuring things, but it's impossible to say what the best film ever made is because that doesn't even really exist as a thing. So it's always going to be a little bit of what's in fashion right now. And I think that this movie is in some ways in fashion right now, but still obviously one of the best films ever made, whether we agree or not.
Well, to a lot of people have voted on it, and it's been really highly ranked the 2 times it could have been, 2012 and 2022. Okay, well, we respect the hell out of In the Mood for Love. Love looking at the movie. And actually, yeah, there's an awful lot of depth. Unlike Mag H. Young, there's a lot of fat on this bone. In 4 days, I will stick with this theme of the month of crazy stupid love and talk about another romantic classic. This will be the first time Barbra Streisand has ever been covered on this channel, as she and Robert Redford, who we've covered many times, fall for each other in The Way We Were. In 7 days, you and I will be talking about 4 guys who are obsessed with Cameron Diaz. Ben Stiller, Matt Dillon, and all the rest. And all the rest. Chris Elliott, and I forget the guy's name, Lee Evans, are convinced that there's something about Mary. That's the one funny one we have this month. I think the only funny one we have in the month of crazy stupid love. The coming attractions trivia for There's Something About Mary. Cameron Diaz and W. Earl Brown played brother and sister in There's Something About Mary, and then would go on to be in a different comedy the very next year, 1999. What film was that?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about There's Something About Mary. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen. If you already follow us at Top 100 Project, nothing will change, including access to our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. You can also reach us by email, haveyouverirseenpodcast@gmail.com. You can find bonus content on our YouTube channel. We are posting all of these podcasts on YouTube as well, along with a little video of us talking about movies we've just seen, the movie that we're about to talk about, and other little things, mailbag corrections, stuff like that.
And then the podcast itself in full that you could download on your device plays after that.
So you can see our pretty faces and hear our pretty voices at the same time. Mm-hmm. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
We'll leave you in peace.
And cut.